A quick heads up before we dive in. This story explores themes of psychological distress, paranoia, and unsettling truths that some listeners might find disturbing. Listener discretion is advised. It started, as so many strange things do, with a forgotten box in the back of a closet. Not just any box, but the box. The one filled with relics from our college years, crammed with concert ticket stubs, faded t-shirts from intramural sports, and a handful of disposable cameras that had never quite made it to the photo lab. Most of them were empty, duds, or already developed and forgotten. But one, nestled deep beneath a crumpled fraternity composite, felt different. Heavier. Unused. Or so we thought. That was Michael's find, actually. He'd been cleaning out his childhood room at his parents' house, preparing for his move cross-country. A final purge before adulthood truly kicked in, he'd called it. He sent a picture of the camera to our group chat: Jessica, David, Sarah, and me, Alex. It was one of those cheap, plastic Fujifilm cameras, the kind we all bought for that one summer trip after freshman year. The infamous Lakeview Lodge trip. We'd gone up to the Adirondacks, rented a cabin that smelled perpetually of pine and damp, and spent a week hiking, swimming, and generally trying to ignore the fact that real life was about to begin. The collective nostalgia hit us hard. "No way," Jessica typed. "You mean there are still undeveloped photos from Lakeview Lodge?" David added a string of shocked emojis. Sarah, ever the pragmatist, simply wrote, "Get it developed, Michael. Now." And he did. Michael, bless his meticulous heart, drove straight to the last remaining photo lab in his hometown, a little mom-and-pop shop that still processed film. He even paid extra for the digital scans just in case. We waited, buzzing with an almost childish excitement. What forgotten memories would surface? Awkward selfies, blurry landscapes, drunken candids? We were anticipating a laugh riot, a treasure trove of embarrassing, cherished moments. We had no idea what kind of Pandora's box he was actually opening. The email arrived late that night, a single zip file from the photo lab. Michael forwarded it to all of us with the subject line, "Lakeview Lodge, the lost tapes." My phone buzzed with notifications as we all started downloading, our separate lives momentarily converging on this digital portal to our shared past. The first few photos were exactly what we expected. David attempting a dive off the dock, mid-flail, water spraying everywhere. Jessica, her hair a wild mess, attempting to build a sandcastle on the rocky shore. Sarah and me, arms slung around each other, grinning wildly at some inside joke I couldn't quite recall. The sun setting behind us, painting the lake in hues of orange and purple. There were pictures of bonfires, esmeralda-stained faces, and endless games of cards on the cabin's rickety porch. We laughed, we reminisced, we shared them in the chat, each photo sparking a fresh wave of forgotten anecdotes. This was perfect. This was exactly what we wanted. Then the photos started to change. Subtly at first. One picture showed us the four of us hiking a trail. But it wasn't the familiar, well-trodden path we remembered near Lakeview. This path was narrower, overgrown, almost menacing, with gnarled, twisted trees that seemed to lean in, casting long, unsettling shadows. And the cabin in the background, just barely visible through the dense foliage, wasn't our cabin. It was darker, more dilapidated, almost derelict. We paused. Did we ever go on that trail? I typed. No, Jessica replied instantly. Definitely not. We stuck to the main loop. That looks creepy. Michael agreed. Yeah, I don't remember that either. Maybe it was just a different angle. But the landscape was too distinct. Too wrong. We scrolled to the next image. This one was a close-up of a small wooden carving. It was an intricately detailed figure, almost totemic, with wide, vacant eyes and a perpetually agape mouth. It looked unsettling, carved from dark, aged wood. It was sitting on a moss-covered rock. None of us had ever seen anything like it. What is that? Sarah asked, her tone shifting from nostalgic amusement to genuine confusion. I have no memory of seeing any kind of weird carving like that out there, David added. It looks ancient. The next photo was of our campfire, but it was burning far too low, more embers than flame, casting long dancing shadows that stretched into an impenetrable darkness. And there was someone else in the picture. Just a silhouette, standing at the very edge of the light, their back to the camera, facing the woods. They were tall, slender, and wore what looked like a wide-brimmed hat. Who is that? Michael typed, his enthusiasm now replaced by a growing unease. We were the only ones there, I reminded everyone. Always. We never invited anyone else. Maybe it was one of us from behind? Jessica suggested, trying to force a reasonable explanation. But we all knew instinctively it wasn't. The posture was wrong. The height was wrong. And none of us owned a hat like that. Then came the photo that truly shattered our calm. It was a picture of the four of us, sitting around a scarred wooden table. Not the one on our cabin porch, but a much older, more rustic table, inside what looked like a completely different, dimly lit room. Our faces were visible, but they weren't smiling. We looked terrified. Eyes wide, mouth slightly open. A palpable sense of dread etched onto every single one of our features. And across from us, partially obscured by the shadows, but undeniably there, was him. The person from the campfire photo. The wide-brimmed hat, the slender build. He was looking directly at the camera. And in his gloved hand, he was holding a disposable camera. The exact same kind Michael had just gotten developed. Silence descended upon our group chat. No one typed. No one sent an emoji. I could feel my heart beginning to pound, a cold knot forming in my stomach. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't a forgotten memory. This was something else entirely. Something impossible. Alex, Michael finally typed, his voice shaking slightly even through the text. Did we ever meet anyone else on that trip? No, I replied, my fingers trembling as I typed. Never. We were totally isolated. That was the whole point. Then who is that? Sarah asked, her message punctuated by a frantic string of question marks. And why do we look so scared? David, usually the most grounded of us, sent a single chilling message. And why is he holding our camera? But it wasn't just him holding a camera. It was the camera. The exact model, the exact color, even the tiny scuff mark I remembered seeing on the one Michael found. He was holding it, pointing it at us, as if he was the one taking this very picture of our terrified faces. The implications were dizzying, horrifying. If he was taking the picture, then who took the picture of him taking the picture? And if he was holding our camera, the one Michael just found, then how could these photos possibly exist? And more importantly, if we never met this person, never went to these places, and never looked that utterly terrified, then whose memories were these? And how had they ended up on a roll of film that was supposed to contain our summer trip? The photos continued, each one a fresh stab of disbelief and terror. A close-up of a strange symbol carved into a tree trunk, a symbol none of us recognized. A blurry shot from inside a cave, a place we definitely never explored. And then a final image. A picture taken from outside our Lakeview cabin at night. But instead of the familiar warm glow from the windows, they were dark, empty, almost like abandoned eyesores. And standing in the front yard, perfectly framed, was the figure in the hat. He was looking directly at the camera, and even though his face was obscured by the brim, I could feel his gaze, cold and unwavering, piercing through the digital image and into my very soul. "This isn't funny, Michael," Jessica finally typed, her usual playful tone replaced by a desperate edge. "Is this some kind of sick prank? Did you Photoshop these?" "No," Michael shot back immediately, his denial raw and genuine. "Why would I do that? I just got them developed. These are the pictures that came back." And that was the terrifying truth. The photo lab had printed these. They were real, tangible images, proof of an experience none of us remembered, an encounter with a stranger, a journey to unsettling places, and a fear so profound it had been completely erased from our minds. We spent the rest of the night on a frantic group call, voices overlapping, theories spiraling. Was someone messing with us? Had someone swapped the film? But who would go to such lengths? And what would be the point? More disturbingly, could these photos be real? Had we actually experienced something so traumatic that our minds had simply deleted it? The idea was almost more terrifying than the thought of a prankster. It meant our memories, our very sense of reality, could not be trusted. The Lakeview Lodge trip had always been a golden memory for us. The last hurrah before the responsibilities of adulthood truly set in. Now it felt tainted, corrupted. These photos weren't just pictures we didn't take. They were pictures of a reality we desperately wished we hadn't lived. And the figure in the hat, staring out from the final image, felt less like a forgotten acquaintance and more like a silent, watchful predator, waiting for us to remember what we had tried so hard to forget. We knew with a chilling certainty that our lives would never be the same. We had to find out who he was, and we had to find out what happened that summer. The air in the room had thickened into something suffocating, pressing down on us with the weight of years of unspoken dread. Jessica was crying, silent tears carving paths through the dust on her cheeks. David, usually the calmest among us, was pacing, his jaw clenched so tight I could practically hear his teeth grinding. Emily sat frozen, staring at the blurred image of us, her own terrified reflection superimposed on the photo. Michael, the one who'd suggested the cameras in the first place, was pale, his eyes wide and vacant, as if he'd seen a ghost. And in a way we all had. A ghost of our past. A specter we'd unknowingly invited into our present. Who is this? Jessica finally whispered, her voice a raw rasp. Who would do this? The question hung in the silence, an echo of our own desperate thoughts. The "I see you" scrawled on the back of that last photo was a declaration, not a warning. It meant this wasn't just some twisted prank. This was personal. This was someone who knew us, someone who had watched us, someone who remembered something we had tried, with every fiber of our being, to forget. That summer. The summer of the cameras. The summer everything changed, even if we hadn't realized it at the time. It was a summer we had collectively buried under layers of false memories and forced amnesia. A summer we had sworn to each other, with a silent, desperate pact, to never speak of again. We spent the next few hours in a haze of fear and fragmented memories. We tried to recall every detail of that summer, every face, every conversation, every fleeting moment that might hold a clue. But it was like trying to grasp smoke. The harder we tried, the more elusive the details became. It was as if a part of our brains had actively erased the most crucial information, leaving behind only distorted, innocuous snippets. Remember that party at Miller's Lake? Michael offered, his voice strained. The one where David almost fell off the dock? David shook his head, running a hand through his hair. Yeah, but that was just typical summer stuff. Kids being dumb. What about it? Nothing, Michael mumbled. Just trying to think of anything out of the ordinary. But there was something out of the ordinary. A heavy, unspoken truth that pulsed beneath the surface of our forced recollections. It was the reason for our pact, the reason for the collective amnesia. It wasn't just a summer of innocent fun. There was an incident. A moment. A choice we made that summer. A decision that had haunted the periphery of our consciousness for years, manifesting as vague anxieties and inexplicable guilt. We knew deep down that the person behind these photos wasn't just some random stranger. This was someone connected to that incident. Someone who had been impacted by it. Someone who had been waiting patiently for the perfect moment to remind us. The photos weren't just a threat. They were a mirror, reflecting a past we had intentionally obscured. And now the reflection was staring back, demanding answers. We decided we couldn't stay in that house. The air felt charged, the shadows too long, too watchful. We needed to be together to confront this as a unit, just like we had that summer. We drove to David's apartment, a place that felt safer, more neutral, though the creeping paranoia followed us like an unwelcome passenger. Every car that passed, every flickering street lamp, every rustle of leaves in the wind felt like a sign, a signal that he was near. Once inside, the forced quiet was even more unnerving than the frantic energy of before. We sat in David's living room, the developed photos spread out on the coffee table like evidence in a cold case. Evidence of our own complicity in something we still couldn't name. It has to be about Alex, Emily said suddenly, her voice barely a whisper. The name hung in the air, a bell tolling a forgotten memory. Alex. My blood ran cold, and I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. Alex. How could we have forgotten Alex? For years his name had been an unspoken taboo, a ghost in our collective past. Alex wasn't part of our core group. He was an outsider. Quiet, brilliant, a little socially awkward. He'd just moved to town that summer. A new kid, an easy target. And we, in our youthful arrogance and insecurity, had made him one. Alex, David repeated, his voice hollow. The prank. The words were out, shattering the fragile dam we had built around that particular memory. The dam we had all tacitly agreed to maintain year after year, until it felt like it had never even existed. But now, with the chilling reality of the photos and the "I see you" message, the dam had burst. The memory started to trickle back slowly at first, then in a flood. It wasn't a malicious, violent prank. Not in our minds, not at the time. It was supposed to be funny, a way to assert our dominance, to bond over a shared secret. We had found out Alex had a crush on Sarah, one of the popular girls in our class. He was shy, had never spoken to her. So we, in our infinite wisdom, decided to help him. We'd set him up, tricked him into thinking Sarah was interested, that she wanted to meet him at an abandoned old barn on the edge of town, a spot kids dared each other to visit. We told him she'd be there waiting, that she was too shy to ask him herself. We even wrote a fake note, imitating Sarah's handwriting to make it convincing. The plan was simple. He'd show up expecting Sarah and instead he'd find nothing. Or maybe if we were feeling particularly cruel, a sign that read, "Gotcha," or something equally humiliating. We'd hide in the woods, watch him laugh, and then go home triumphant in our youthful mischief. But it didn't go like that. Not exactly. We waited, Jessica recounted, her eyes wide with remembered shame. He showed up looking so hopeful. He had flowers, remember? A small pathetic bouquet he must have picked from someone's garden. I remembered. The way he clutched them, his shoulders hunched, his excitement a fragile thing we were about to shatter. We had been hidden in the tall grass, giggling, the disposable cameras ready, because Michael, in his infinite wisdom, thought it would be hilarious to capture Alex's face when he realized he'd been duped. He waited there for almost an hour, Emily added, her voice trembling, calling her name, looking around confused. And we just watched. The humor had drained out of us then, replaced by a creeping discomfort. What had seemed like a harmless joke felt mean-spirited, cruel even. But we were teenagers, too proud to admit we'd gone too far, too scared to reveal ourselves. And then, David continued, his gaze fixed on some point beyond us, he started yelling. Not at us, not at Sarah, but just into the empty barn. He was crying. And he threw the flowers against the wall. That image, so vivid now, made my stomach clench. The quiet, hopeful Alex reduced to a weeping, humiliated mess. It was far more devastating than we had anticipated. We hadn't intended to break him. We just wanted a laugh. We felt terrible, Michael said, his voice barely audible. We just scattered, ran home, and then we made the pact. Never speak of it again. Pretend it never happened. Alex transferred schools a few weeks later, and we convinced ourselves it was just a coincidence. That was it. The incident we had so desperately tried to erase. The summer we had buried. And now, the person who had been watching us from the shadows, the person who had taken those photos, was reminding us of our sin. The disposable cameras, Jessica breathed, a new layer of horror dawning on her face. We had them that night. We were going to take pictures of him. My blood ran cold again. The cameras, the very instruments of our prank, now turned against us. It wasn't just a random choice of medium for our stalker. It was a direct, chilling callback. A symbol. So it has to be Alex, I said, the words heavy in the air. Or someone close to him. Someone who knew what we did. But Alex had moved away. Years had passed. Why now? Why this elaborate, terrifying game? And how had he, or whoever it was, gotten those cameras? The ones we had used, the ones we had forgotten about and then rediscovered, full of photos he had taken. It was a paradox, a horrifying twist that made no sense. Unless he hadn't moved away. Unless he had been here all along. Watching. Waiting. The thought sent a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the cool evening air. That "I see you" on the back of that photo wasn't just a threat from the past. It was a statement of present observation. We had been seen not just that summer but now. And the person who saw us, who knew our darkest secret, was closing in. We had to find Alex. We had to understand what happened to him after that night. Because the deeper we dug into our forgotten past, the more we realized that the summer of our innocence had ended with a tragedy we had willfully ignored. And someone was determined to make us pay the price. And someone was determined to make us pay the price. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, like the humid summer nights we were trying so desperately to forget. We were huddled around Michael's kitchen island, the stack of developed photos splayed out between us like evidence at a crime scene. Jessica, usually so composed, had her hands clasped over her mouth, her eyes wide with a terror I recognized in my own reflection. David, ever the pragmatist, was meticulously flipping through the photos again, his brow furrowed in a desperate attempt to find an explanation, a trick of the light, anything to disprove the horrifying truth staring us in the face. Michael, who had started this whole thing by finding the camera, looked utterly defeated. His shoulders slumped as if the weight of our shared past had suddenly materialized into a physical burden. "It's not possible," Jessica whispered, her voice barely a breath. "We didn't take these." We couldn't have. But there they were. 24 grainy, slightly faded photographs, each one a stark, unsettling window into a summer we thought we remembered perfectly. They were unmistakably from our old disposable camera. The very one we'd passed around that summer, capturing blurry selfies, sun-drenched beach days, and late-night bonfires. The camera Michael had found tucked away in a dusty box of old keepsakes in his parents' attic. The camera we'd all laughed about, reminiscing about simpler times, before he'd actually gotten the film developed. The first few photos were innocuous enough. A blurry shot of Jessica trying to balance a stack of pancakes on her head, David midair jumping into the lake, Michael making a goofy face with a hot dog hanging out of his mouth. These were our memories, the ones we'd kept, the ones that formed the foundation of our nostalgia. But then the sequence shifted. The 10th photo was where the first crack appeared in our collective memory. It was a picture of the old abandoned lighthouse, a place we dared each other to visit after dark, but never actually had. Not really. Or so we thought. In the photo, the lighthouse stood silhouetted against a bruised purple sky, but what sent a shiver down my spine was the unmistakable outline of a figure standing at the very top, silhouetted against the last sliver of twilight. It wasn't one of us. We knew that. We'd always said we were too scared to climb it, but the camera had been ours. "Who is that?" I asked, my voice thin. David shook his head, his fingers tracing the faint outline. "No idea. We never went up there. Not that night anyway. I swear." "We talked about it," Michael interjected, his voice raspy. "We were all hyped up saying we'd do it, but then I don't know, we got distracted. Someone suggested getting ice cream and we just went." Jessica let out a small choke sound. "But if we didn't go, and we didn't take this picture, then who did? And how is it on our camera?" That was the question. The terrifying, impossible question that peeled back the layers of our carefully constructed past. The next photo was even worse. It was a close-up, surprisingly clear for a disposable camera, of a face. A face we all recognized but hadn't thought about in years. Ethan Miller. He was an older kid, a year ahead of us in high school, who'd kind of drifted into our orbit that summer. He was quiet, a little bit of a loner, but he had a dry wit and an infectious laugh once you got him talking. He'd hung out with us for a few weeks, joining our lake trips and bonfire nights, before he just disappeared. Moved away, we'd all assumed. His parents were always relocating for work, we'd heard. We hadn't really questioned it beyond that. He was just a fleeting part of a perfect summer. But in this photo, Ethan wasn't laughing. He wasn't even smiling. His face was pale, his eyes wide with an expression of pure, unadulterated fear. He was looking directly into the lens, as if pleading for help, and behind him, barely visible in the shadowy background, was the faint, distorted shape of someone else. Just a shoulder, a dark sleeve, a hint of a chin. Too blurry to identify. A cold dread seeped into my bones. This wasn't a casual snapshot. This was a moment of terror captured on our camera, a moment we had no memory of. "Oh my God," Jessica whispered, her voice trembling. "Ethan, I haven't thought about him in forever." "He looks terrified," I said, my gaze fixed on his eyes. "What happened to him?" Michael finally looked up, his eyes bloodshot. "I don't know. I swear to you I don't remember this. Any of this. We talked to him, sure, but this picture? No, I've never seen him look like that. Not with us." David, who had been studying the photo intently, suddenly pointed to something in the corner. "Look at his shirt. See that? It's ripped. And is that dirt? Mud." We leaned in closer. He was right. Ethan's usually pressed t-shirt was torn at the shoulder, and there were dark smudges of what looked like dried mud or dirt across his chest. It looked like he'd been in a struggle. The next few photos were a blur of dark, indistinguishable shapes, as if the camera had been dropped or jostled. Then another clear one. It was a shot of the dense woods bordering the lake, the ones we were always warned to stay out of after dark. The trees looked menacing, their branches clawing at a moonless sky. And on the ground, partially obscured by fallen leaves, was what looked like Ethan's backpack, the distinctive red and black one he always carried. My heart began to pound a frantic rhythm against my ribs. This wasn't just a simple mistake, a forgotten moment. This was something far more sinister. This was proof that Ethan hadn't just moved away. Something had happened to him. And somehow our camera, our memories, and by extension we were involved. "He didn't just move away, did he?" Jessica asked. the unspoken fear echoing in her voice. We always just assumed. No one ever talked about it. His parents just packed up and left a few weeks later. We just thought they went with him. His parents left after he disappeared? I clarified, a new horrifying realization dawning on me. We just thought they were a transient family. Michael ran a hand through his hair, looking utterly distraught. I don't know, man. I was 17. We were all just kids. We heard he moved, we didn't question it. It was summer. We were invincible. But if these photos are real, David said, his voice grim, and they were on our camera, then someone took them. Someone who was there. Someone who saw Ethan in distress. And then they just left him. Or worse. The implications were staggering. If someone had taken these photos with our camera, and these events had truly transpired, then our entire memory of that summer was a lie. A carefully constructed illusion to protect ourselves from something truly terrible. And the note, I said, remembering the chilling message that had accompanied the developed photos when Michael picked them up. Asterisk, did you really forget? Or did you just choose to? Asterisk. That question, innocuous at first, now felt like a direct accusation. It wasn't just a random query, it was a challenge. A veiled threat. Someone knew. Someone knew what these photos meant, what we had forgotten, or what we had actively suppressed. And they were holding us accountable. Just as the silence in the kitchen became unbearable, a sharp, insistent vibration cut through the air. Michael's phone, lying face down on the counter, lit up, vibrating rhythmically. He picked it up, his hand shaking slightly. It was an email from an unknown sender. The subject line was blank. He opened it, and the screen glowed with a single image. It was another photo, but this one wasn't from the disposable camera. This was a crisp, high-resolution digital image. It was a current photo of Michael's house, taken from the street. Our faces, illuminated by the kitchen lights, were clearly visible through the window. We were all looking down at the photos on the island, our expressions of fear and confusion perfectly captured. And superimposed on the bottom corner of the image in stark white text were two words. Asterisk, still forgetting? Asterisk. A collective gasp escaped our lips. We weren't just being reminded of a forgotten tragedy. We were being watched. Someone was out there, lurking in the shadows, observing our every move, waiting for us to remember. Or perhaps waiting for us to confess. The summer of our innocence was long gone, replaced by a chilling reality. The past wasn't just catching up to us. It was actively hunting us down, armed with the very images we didn't take, and a truth we had desperately tried to bury. The summer of our innocence was long gone, replaced by a chilling reality. The past wasn't just catching up to us. It was actively hunting us down, armed with the very images we didn't take, and a truth we had desperately tried to bury. The cold dread that settled in my stomach after seeing those first unsettling photos wasn't just about fear. It was about a profound violation. Someone had peeled back the layers of our lives, found the rotten core we'd meticulously hidden, and was now waving it in our faces. My comfortable existence, the one I'd built brick by brick since leaving that cursed town, felt like a house of cards in a hurricane. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle outside my window, sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I found myself checking locks multiple times, peering through blinds at nothing, convinced that a pair of unseen eyes was always on me, waiting. I had to reach them. Jessica, David, Emily. We were bound by this secret and now by this threat. My fingers fumbled as I dialed Jessica's number, the urgency palpable in my trembling hands. She answered on the third ring, her voice tight, strained. Michael? Did you get it too? The photos? Yes, I rasped, my throat dry. It's not just a sick joke, Jess. Someone knows. Everything. There was a sharp intake of breath on her end. I know. I've been staring at them all night. It's like a punch to the gut. Who would even do this? And how? Jessica, ever the pragmatist, was already trying to dissect the problem, but I could hear the tremor beneath her analytical tone. The fear was in her too. Deep. Next was David. He picked up immediately, his voice gruff, laced with a mix of anger and panic. I swear to God, if this is some kind of setup, Michael, I'll kill them myself. His characteristic bluster couldn't hide the raw fear. David had always been the one to lash out, to deflect, to act tough, but this was different. This was a vulnerability I hadn't heard in his voice since that summer. What do we do? We can't just let this person expose us. Our lives would be ruined. We need to talk, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. All of us. In person. Talk about what? He shot back. How we're all screwed. How someone's got the goods on us. We buried that night, Michael. We buried it. The desperation in his voice was chilling. Emily was the hardest to reach. Her phone went straight to voicemail several times, sending a fresh wave of dread through me. Of all of us, Emily was the most fragile. The weight of that summer had always pressed down on her the hardest, threatening to crush her. I pictured her, curled up in her apartment, staring at those images, succumbing to the terror. Finally, her shaky voice answered. Michael? Oh my God, Michael, I don't know what to do. I can't breathe. I can't think. They know. They know everything. Her voice cracked, dissolving into choked sobs. Emily, listen to me, I urged, trying to project calm I didn't feel. We're going to figure this out, but we need to be together. Can you meet us? Meet, she whimpered. Where? What if they're watching? What if they follow us? Her paranoia was contagious. It was a valid point. If someone had these photos, if they were sending them to us, they clearly had us under surveillance. Meeting in public felt like walking into a trap. Meeting at one of our houses felt even worse, like inviting the predator into our den. We need to be smart about this, Jessica interjected when I put her on a three-way call with David. No phones, no obvious meeting spots. Let's pick somewhere obscure, somewhere we used to go. Somewhere nobody would think twice about. David scoffed. And where's that, Jess? The old abandoned mill? The place where we... He trailed off, the unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. The place where we created the secret that now haunted us. Not there, I quickly said, a shudder running through me. Somewhere neutral. A diner. The one on Elm Street, near the edge of town. The one with the terrible coffee that's always empty after midnight. It was a place from our youth. A forgotten relic that felt safe in its anonymity. We agreed on midnight 2 nights from now. It gave us time to think, to mentally prepare, and to arrive separately, cautiously. But even as we made the plan, a cold knot of dread tightened in my stomach. 2 nights felt like an eternity. 2 nights for whatever entity was hunting us to make its next move. And it did. It was the next evening, just as the sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues that felt strangely mocking, that my phone rang again. It was Emily, her voice a strangled scream this time, not just sobs. Michael, you have to come. Please. Someone was here. They left something. My blood ran cold. Emily, are you safe? Did you call the police? No, I can't call the police. You know I can't. Just, please come. I'm alone. I'm so scared. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my car keys, my heart hammering against my ribs. The drive to Emily's apartment felt endless, every red light an agonizing delay. My mind raced, trying to imagine what something could be. Another photo? A direct threat? Had the hunter escalated from psychological warfare to physical intrusion? When I finally pulled up to her building, her door was ajar, a sliver of darkness beckoning me inside. Emily, I called out, pushing the door open slowly, my hand instinctively reaching for the heavy umbrella I kept in my car, now gripped like a weapon. The apartment was eerily silent, save for Emily's ragged breathing coming from the living room. She was huddled on the sofa, knees drawn to her chest, face pale and tear-streaked. Her eyes, wide with terror, were fixed on the coffee table. There, lying in the center of the polished wood, was another photograph. But this wasn't like the digital images we'd received. This was a physical print, an old-fashioned snapshot, slightly faded at the edges, as if it had been stored for years. I found it like this, Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. The door was unlocked. Nothing else was touched. Just this. I approached the table with trepidation, my gaze locked on the image. It was grainy, slightly out of focus, taken in low light. But there was no mistaking the scene. It was the clearing. Our clearing. The place where the bonfire had raged, where the laughter had turned to whispers, and the whispers to a horrified silence. The photo showed the edge of the clearing, the dense tree line, a dark wall behind it. And then I saw it. In the foreground, partially obscured by a bush, was a figure. Small, almost camouflaged by the shadows, but unmistakably human. It was facing away from the camera, its back to the lens, looking into the clearing, watching us. A chill colder than any winter night seeped into my bones. This wasn't just a photo of the event. This was a photo from the event, taken by someone who was there. Someone who had been hiding in the periphery, observing us unseen. Who is that? Emily whimpered, her eyes still glued to the terrifying image. I didn't answer her. I couldn't. My mind was reeling, trying to process the implications. If someone was hiding in the woods that night, watching us, then everything we thought we knew about our secret was a lie. We hadn't been alone. We hadn't been unobserved. The photo was a silent accusation. It wasn't just proof that our secret existed. It was proof that someone else knew it too, and had known it from the very beginning. The angle of the shot, the perspective from the hidden watcher, shifted everything. It wasn't just about what we did, but about what they saw. And then a detail in the photo snagged my attention, a tiny, almost imperceptible detail that made my breath hitch in my throat. Near the bottom corner of the print, barely visible in the dim light, was a faint, almost ghost-like reflection. A glint, a lens flare, as if the person taking the photo had been holding a disposable camera, just like the ones we'd all bought that summer. The disposable camera photos we didn't take. But someone else did. Someone who was there, in the shadows, capturing the truth we thought was buried forever. The truth that was now staring at us, not from our memories, but from the cold, unblinking eye of another's camera. And the most terrifying thought of all. If someone was watching us that night, hidden in the dark, then who else could have been there? Who else did we miss? And what did they truly see? The air in Emily's living room, which had been thick with laughter and nostalgia just moments before, now felt like a suffocating blanket. The photos spread across the coffee table weren't just images anymore. They were accusations, fragments of a surveillance operation none of us had ever suspected. Michael, usually the calmest among us, was pale, his hand trembling as he picked up one of the shots. A blurry picture of the four of us, backs to the camera, walking along the abandoned railway tracks. It was a shot we remembered taking, or rather being in, but the perspective was all wrong. It was from behind us, low to the ground, almost as if someone had been crouching. This isn't just a mix-up, Jessica whispered, her voice barely audible. Her eyes darted from photo to photo, then to David, then to me. This is someone watching us. David, who had a knack for rationalizing even the most bizarre situations, tried to find an explanation. Maybe it's a prank? Someone we know messing with us. But even as he said it, the conviction wasn't there. The dread in his eyes mirrored our own. A prank felt too flimsy for the cold, calculated nature of these images. There was no humor, no obvious setup. Just observation. I picked up the camera itself, turning it over in my hands. It was a cheap, generic plastic disposable camera. No distinguishing marks. No name, no date, no sticker from a particular store. Just the brand name, faded from what I assumed was years of being tucked away in a drawer. It felt impossibly light, yet heavy with unspoken menace. Who even uses these anymore? I mumbled, more to myself than to the group. That's the point, isn't it? Emily said, her voice tight. We did. We used one that night. And now this. She gestured vaguely at the scattered prints, a silent horror movie unfolding on her coffee table. Someone must have known we had one. Someone must have known where we were going. The implications were chilling. Our night of reckless abandon, our quest for forgotten thrills, had been meticulously documented by an unseen eye. Every laugh, every whispered secret, every moment of vulnerability captured. We had been so caught up in our own adventure, so convinced of our solitude in the forgotten corners of the town, that we hadn't noticed the shadow lurking. We spent the next hour, maybe two, in a morbid dissection of every single photograph. We laid them out in chronological order, trying to reconstruct the timeline, desperately searching for any clue, any anomaly that might betray the identity of our watcher. The first few photos were indeed of the old abandoned mill, just as we remembered. Shots of the rusted machinery, the broken windows, the graffiti-covered walls. But then came the ones that twisted our stomachs. A shot of Michael climbing through a collapsed section of wall, his back to the camera, illuminated by the beam of his flashlight. A photo of Jessica and Emily laughing as they tried to balance on a fallen beam. Their faces clear, their expressions joyful. A picture of David, silhouetted against a moonlit window, staring out. These weren't just candid, they were intimate. They were taken from angles we couldn't have achieved ourselves, from positions that suggested deliberate hiding. "Look at this one," David said, his finger tracing a spot on a photo of the four of us standing on the mill's second floor, silhouetted against the broken skylight. "See this?" He pointed to a dark corner, a patch of deeper shadow that seemed to cling to the wall. "It almost looks like a shape, a person maybe." We all leaned in, squinting. It was impossible to tell for sure. Just a deeper patch of darkness, easily dismissed as a trick of the light or a flaw in the cheap film. But now, with the chilling context, it felt like a silent accusation, a confirmation that someone had been there, lurking, watching. Then came the photos from the old railway tracks. Again, shots of us walking, exploring, our faces sometimes visible, sometimes turned away. One particular photo made my blood run cold. It was a close-up of the tracks, the rusty metal gleaming under what must have been a full moon. And there, just barely visible in the reflection on the wet steel, was a fleeting, distorted image. Not a clear face, not even a distinct figure, but a definite impression of something behind us. A dark mass, slightly taller than us, with what looked like two pinpricks of light reflections from eyes, staring back. It was gone almost as quickly as you saw it, a ghost in the reflection, but once seen, it couldn't be unseen. "What is that?" Emily gasped, pulling back slightly. It's like a distorted face." "It's just the reflection, Em." Michael tried to reassure her, but his voice lacked conviction. He too was staring, mesmerized by the unsettling anomaly. "The metal's uneven, it's old." "No," Jessica interjected, her voice firm. "Look closer. It's not just distorted. It's there. It's looking at us. Or at the camera." The thought struck us all simultaneously. If that was a reflection of the person holding the camera, then that person was right behind us, inches away, breathing the same cold night air. And we hadn't known. We hadn't felt a thing. The terror escalated from an abstract fear to a visceral, suffocating dread. We weren't just talking about a stranger who mixed up cameras. We were talking about an active, silent stalker. Someone who had invaded our personal space, our private moments, and had done so with an unnerving proficiency. The later photos were from the abandoned schoolhouse, the final stop on our ill-fated adventure. These were the worst. One showed Michael trying to push open the heavy, creaking front door, his back to the camera, unaware of the lens focused on him from the bushes opposite. Another was taken through a broken window, capturing Jessica and me exploring a classroom, our flashlights cutting through the dust-filled air. Our faces were clear, illuminated by our own beams, our expressions a mixture of curiosity and slight apprehension. The angle was low, as if the photographer had been peering in through the shattered pane, hidden from view. But it was the very last photo that shattered any lingering semblance of composure. It wasn't of us. It was of the schoolhouse itself from a distance, taken after we had left. The shot was dark, the building a hulking silhouette against the pre-dawn sky. But in the foreground, tucked behind a crumbling stone wall, was a faint, almost invisible detail. A small dark object, partially obscured by overgrown weeds. It looked like a discarded piece of clothing, perhaps a dark hoodie or a backpack. And next to it, even fainter, was something else. A flicker of light, a reflection. It was impossible to tell what it was, but the implication was clear. Someone had been there, waiting. Someone had been watching the schoolhouse after we left. This isn't random. I finally managed to say, my voice hoarse. This person followed us. From the mill to the tracks to the schoolhouse. They knew our route. But how? Emily asked, her eyes wide with fear. How could they have known where we were going? We just made it up as we went along that night. That was the terrifying puzzle. We hadn't planned a rigid itinerary. Our decisions had been spontaneous, driven by a mix of nostalgia and drunken impulse. We discussed options, yes, but nothing was set in stone until we were already on our way to the next spot. How could anyone have anticipated our movements with such precision? Unless they weren't anticipating, unless they were leading. The thought was so horrifying, so utterly outlandish, that it hung in the air unspoken for several long moments. The idea that our adventure had been orchestrated, that we were merely actors in a play directed by an unseen hand, was almost too much to bear. "We need to go to the police," Jessica declared, her jaw set. "This is beyond a prank. This is stalking. This is dangerous." Michael nodded slowly, running a hand through his hair. "She's right. We have to. This camera, these photos, it's evidence." But even as he spoke, a new insidious thought began to worm its way into my mind. If this person was so meticulous, so careful, so completely invisible, what made us think they hadn't covered their tracks? What if going to the police only escalated things? What if this was exactly what they wanted? To push us, to make us react? And then there was the question that gnawed at me, a cold, sharp claw in my gut. Why? Why us? What could possibly be the motive for such an elaborate, terrifying game? We were just a group of friends reliving some old memories, or so we thought. Was there something more? Something we had forgotten? Something buried deep in the past that this silent observer was trying to unearth, or perhaps to punish? The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken fears. The innocent nostalgia of the disposable camera had curdled into a bitter, terrifying reality. We were no longer just friends reminiscing. We were targets. And the hunt, we realized with a sickening lurch, had only just begun. The photos weren't just a record of our past. They were a chilling prologue to a future we couldn't yet comprehend. And the most terrifying part? We were still holding the evidence of our own unwitting participation. We were still holding the evidence of our own unwitting participation. The silence that followed was heavier than any words, a suffocating blanket woven from fear and disbelief. Jessica was the first to break it, her voice a thin, reedy whisper. This isn't real. It can't be real. She clutched one of the photos, the one showing Michael and David near the abandoned house, her knuckles white. David, usually the calmest among us, was pacing, a frantic energy radiating from him. But it is real, Jess. We saw the dates. We saw the faces. Our faces. Doing things we haven't done, going places we haven't been. He ran a hand through his hair, his eyes wide and unfocused. What does unwitting participation even mean? Are we going to be involved in something terrible? Michael, who had been meticulously resorting the photos, his brow furrowed in concentration, finally looked up. His face was pale, a stark contrast to the dark circles beneath his eyes. That's what we have to figure out. Every single detail, every shadow, every reflection. He laid them out on the coffee table again, meticulously arranging them in chronological order based on the development dates, even though the events depicted clearly hadn't happened yet. Emily, who had been unusually quiet, spoke up, her voice surprisingly steady despite the tremor in her hands. Let's assume, just for a second, that this isn't some elaborate prank or a hallucination or a nightmare. Let's assume these photos are predictions, and that we are somehow involved. She pointed to the photo of the overturned car on the highway. Look at this one again. Michael, you're in the background talking on your phone. David, you're further down the road looking back. And Jessica, that's your car, parked on the shoulder, hazard lights on. We all leaned in, scrutinizing the image. It was true. The details were undeniable. Michael was wearing the blue hoodie he'd bought last week, the one with the subtle tear near the cuff. David had on his favorite beat-up baseball cap. And Jessica's silver sedan, easily identifiable by the small dent on the passenger side door, was indeed there. None of us had been near that stretch of highway in weeks, let alone witnessed a major accident. But why? Jessica whispered, her voice cracking. Why would we be there? Why would I be pulled over? Did I see something? Did I cause it? The questions tumbled out, each one more terrifying than the last. That's the point of unwitting, isn't it? Michael said, his voice low. We don't know why yet, but the photo suggests we will be there, and that our presence, even if accidental, is part of the event. He picked up another photo, this one showing a dimly lit alleyway behind a row of old brick buildings. In the foreground, partially obscured by shadow, was a figure. And in the background, almost imperceptible, was Emily, walking away, her head turned slightly as if she just glanced back. Emily gasped, snatching the photo. I've never been in an alley like this. Not ever. She zoomed in on her phone, trying to brighten the image. And who is that person? I can't even tell if they're male or female. It's not about what you have done, Em, David said, his voice softer now, sensing her distress. It's about what you will do, and what we will do. He paused, then his eyes darted to the disposable camera, still sitting innocently on the table, its plastic shell a stark orange. The camera. Where did it come from? Really think back. Michael, you said you just found it in a box, right? Michael nodded slowly. Yeah, I was cleaning out the garage, getting rid of old junk. It was in a box with some old photo album stuff from high school. I just assumed it was one of ours that never got developed. He picked it up, turning it over in his hands. It felt light, innocuous, yet now it pulsed with a sinister, inexplicable power. I don't remember buying it, and none of us remember using it. But someone did use it, Jessica pointed out, her eyes fixed on the camera. Someone took these pictures. Or something did. And not just any pictures, Emily added, her voice tinged with a new kind of dread. Pictures of the future. Our future. She shivered. This is like something out of a bad movie, but it's happening to us. We spent the next few hours in a feverish, almost manic state, poring over every single photo again. We looked for anomalies, for hidden messages, for anything that could explain the impossible. We even tried to remember specific instances where we might have unknowingly acquired the camera. Think, Michael urged, his voice strained. Was there anyone unusual at that party last month? Anyone we didn't recognize? Or when we went to the lake house? Did anyone leave anything behind? We racked our brains, replaying memories, searching for a crack in the foundation of our reality. There were fragmented recollections. A brief, awkward conversation with a stranger at a coffee shop. A package mistakenly delivered to the wrong address. A fleeting moment of disorientation when we'd walked into a crowded store. But nothing concrete, nothing that screamed time-traveling camera delivery system. Then David pointed at something in the background of the alleyway photo, the one Emily was in. Look, behind those trash cans. Is that a symbol? Or just graffiti? We all leaned in. It was faint, almost completely obscured by shadow, but there was a distinct, crudely drawn symbol on the brick wall. It looked like a stylized eye, but with a jagged, almost broken pupil and 3 small radiating lines beneath it, like tears or rays. I've never seen that before, Emily murmured, trying to zoom in further. It's creepy. Michael's eyes widened. Wait a second. I have seen that. Or something like it. He scrambled to his feet, heading towards the bookshelf in the living room. When I was cleaning out the garage, I found this old dusty journal. It wasn't mine, wasn't my parents'. It was just there. I almost threw it out, but something made me keep it. He rummaged through a pile of books, pulling out a small leather-bound journal, its cover faded and worn. He opened it to a random page, and there, scrawled in faded ink, was the exact same symbol. The jagged eye, the 3 radiating lines. What is that? Jessica asked, her voice hushed. I don't know, Michael admitted, flipping through the journal. It's mostly ramblings, strange diagrams, cryptic notes. I assumed it was some old, forgotten diary from a previous owner, maybe a kid who was into occult stuff. I barely glanced at it. He showed us another page. Look, here it is again. And here. It's all over this thing. As we looked through the journal, a chill snaked its way down my spine. The handwriting was erratic, sometimes neat, sometimes frantic, almost illegible. The entries were dated, but the dates were inconsistent, sometimes jumping forward years, then back again. And interspersed with the strange symbols were phrases that sent a fresh wave of dread through us. The lens sees all. The tapestry unravels. They walk among us, weaving futures. This is insane, Jessica whispered, shrinking back from the journal. This is like a prop from a horror movie. It's more than a prop, Jess, Emily said, her voice barely audible. It's connected. This journal, these photos, they're all part of the same twisted puzzle. Suddenly, David's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then his eyes went wide. No way. He held it up for us to see. It was a local news alert. Small brush fire reported near the old abandoned mill on Miller's Creek. Firefighters on scene, but the blaze is spreading rapidly due to dry conditions. We all froze. The abandoned mill. Miller's Creek. Michael fumbled through the stack of photos, his hands trembling. He pulled out one we hadn't given much thought to, a blurry, distant shot of a building engulfed in smoke, flames licking at the roofline. It was clearly the old mill. And in the foreground, almost like an afterthought, was an empty, orange disposable camera, lying on the ground, partially obscured by scorched earth. This is it, Michael breathed, his voice hollow. This is happening. Right now. The fire at the mill. His gaze then dropped to the disposable camera still clutched in his hand, then to the one depicted in the photo, lying abandoned. And look, the camera. It's there. After the fire. A sickening realization dawned on us. The photos didn't just predict the future. They showed our future, and the camera's journey through it. It was as if the camera was an active participant, a silent witness, left behind at the scene of events it had captured. "What does that mean?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. "Does it mean we have to go there? To the mill?" "No," Jessica exclaimed, shaking her head vehemently. "Why would we? If we go, we'll be part of it. We'll fulfill the prophecy, whatever this is." But David was already on his feet, his eyes fixed on the news alert on his phone. "But if we don't go, what then? Do we just let it happen? Do we ignore the fact that these photos show us being involved in something potentially dangerous?" He looked at Michael, then at the journal, then back at the photos. "What if we're not just passive observers in these pictures? What if our unwitting participation means we're meant to do something? What if we're meant to prevent something or change something?" The air in the room grew heavy, charged with a terrifying mixture of urgency and dread. The local news alert had shattered the last vestiges of our denial. The impossible was now undeniably real, unfolding before our eyes. The photos weren't just a record of doom. They were a call to action, a terrifying invitation to step into a future we knew nothing about, guided only by the cryptic images captured by a camera we didn't remember owning. And as the siren of a distant fire truck wailed faintly in the night, a chilling certainty settled over us. We were no longer just friends sharing a strange discovery. We were players in a game we didn't understand, pawns in a narrative orchestrated by an unknown entity, or perhaps by fate itself. The mill fire was happening, and according to the photos, we were somehow going to be a part of it. The question wasn't if we would go, but when and why, and what we would find when we got there. The disposable camera sat on the table, a silent orange oracle, its lens seemingly staring into our very souls, daring us to defy the future it had already captured. The silence that followed was heavier than any I'd ever experienced, a physical presence in the room, suffocating us. It wasn't just the absence of sound, but the resounding echo of our own disbelief, our terror, our complete and utter helplessness. The air crackled with unspoken questions, each more terrifying than the last. How could this be real? What did it mean? And most critically, what were we supposed to do? Michael was the first to break it, his voice a strained whisper, barely audible above the frantic beat of my own heart. This can't be happening. It's a trick. A prank. David, where did you even get this thing? David, however, didn't look up from the camera. His eyes, usually so full of life and mischief, were hollow, fixed on the orange plastic shell as if searching for an answer trapped within its very mechanism. "I told you. Just found it. On the hiking trail. Near the old reservoir. It was just lying there, like someone dropped it." His voice was flat, devoid of its usual energy. Jessica, ever the pragmatist, tried to find a logical foothold in the quicksand of our reality. "Okay, let's think this through. Is it possible someone swapped the film? Or maybe it's some kind of elaborate Photoshop. A deepfake, but for physical photos." She reached out, her fingers hovering over the prints scattered on the table, as if afraid to touch them. Emily, pale and trembling, shook her head vehemently. "No. No way. We saw the last picture develop. We saw it appear. There was no time for anything like that. And that's our car in the picture. And the orphanage. I remember passing that old sign once, years ago, when we went camping upstate. It's real." Her voice cracked with the sheer weight of her fear. She was right. The details were too specific, too personal. The dent on the passenger side fender of Michael's sedan, the specific pattern of rust on the orphanage sign, the way the ivy climbed the exact corner of the building, these weren't easily faked. This wasn't a prank. This was a window. A terrifying, intrusive window into a future that, by all accounts, hadn't happened yet. "So what are we saying?" Michael demanded, his voice rising, a tremor of desperation in it. "That this camera, it takes pictures of the future? That we're just going to walk into whatever these photos show? Is that it? We're just puppets." The word hung in the air, heavy with a chilling truth. Puppets. Was that what we were? Destiny's playthings, forced to follow a script already written, already photographed? "We can't just ignore it," David finally said, his gaze still locked on the camera. "We can't pretend we didn't see this. These pictures, they showed us there. At that orphanage. And that figure." He shivered, a visible tremor running through his frame. "Someone is there. Something is going to happen." "But what?" Emily pleaded, tears welling in her eyes. "Are we supposed to go there and stop it? Or are we supposed to go there and cause it? What if by trying to change it, we actually make it happen? This was the crux of our terrifying dilemma, the paradox of foreknowledge. If we knew the future, did we have the power to alter it? Or were we merely fulfilling a predetermined path? The very act of knowing seemed to bind us to it. I looked at each of their faces, reflecting my own fear, confusion, and a strange morbid pull. The crumbling orphanage, the shadowy figure, the sense of dread emanating from those faded prints. It was terrifying, yes, but it was also a challenge, a puzzle, a desperate plea for intervention. "We have to go," I said, the words surprising even myself. They came out with a conviction I hadn't known I possessed. "We have to go to Willow Creek Orphanage. Not to cause it, not to fulfill it, but to understand it. To find out what's really going on." Michael scoffed, running a hand through his hair. "Are you insane? We have no idea what we're walking into. Could be dangerous." That figure in the shadows, it wasn't exactly waving hello. "Exactly," David interjected, his voice gaining a desperate edge. "That's why we have to go. If something bad is going to happen and we know about it, how can we just sit here and do nothing? What if it's someone in trouble? What if it's us in trouble?" Jessica, always the one to analyze, crossed her arms. "Okay, if we are going, and I'm still not entirely convinced this isn't some elaborate sick joke, we need a plan. We can't just drive out there blind. Do these photos give us any other clues? A time of day? Anything?" We spread the photos out again, scrutinizing every detail. The light in the pictures was dim, diffused, suggesting either early morning or late afternoon, perhaps even twilight. The sky was overcast in some, a dull, bruised purple in others. There was no date, no timestamp, just the chilling imagery. "The way the shadows fall," I mused, pointing to one of the orphanage shots. "It looks like late afternoon, maybe approaching dusk. And the foliage, it's still green but not full summer. Late summer, early fall, perhaps." "So soon," Emily whispered, her voice barely a breath. "It's going to happen soon." The urgency became palpable. We couldn't wait weeks or even days. The feeling was that the event was imminent. The camera had shown us a fleeting glimpse, a warning of something just around the corner, waiting to ambush us. "We need supplies," Jessica declared, taking charge in her usual way. "Flashlights, fully charged phones, a first aid kit. Maybe a map, though GPS should handle it. And we need to know what we're looking for, beyond just a crumbling building." David picked up the photo with the shadowy figure again. "This person, or whatever it is it a threat? A victim? Is it even human?" The ambiguity was agonizing. The figure was tall, slender, obscured by deep shadow, almost like a cutout against the faded brick. "We go prepared for anything," I said, trying to project a confidence I didn't entirely feel. "We stick together. We don't split up. And we observe. We try to find out what's happening without putting ourselves in unnecessary danger." Michael still looked deeply uncomfortable, but the collective resolve seemed to sway him. "All right," he conceded, rubbing his temples. "But if this gets too weird or too dangerous, we turn around. No heroics. No risking our lives for a disposable camera's prophecy." The unspoken agreement hung in the air. We were doing this. We were going to Willow Creek Orphanage. The when felt like tomorrow or the day after at the absolute latest. The why was a desperate gamble against fate, a defiant attempt to seize agency in a situation that screamed determinism. That night, sleep was a distant, unreachable shore. Every creak of the house, every rustle outside, sent my heart racing. I kept seeing the images, replaying the sequence in my mind. The abandoned building, the rusted sign, the chilling, indistinct figure. The disposable camera sat on my bedside table, a silent sentinel, its orange casing glowing faintly in the moonlight filtering through my window, a constant, unsettling reminder of the bizarre truth that had invaded our lives. The next morning, a strange blend of dread and restless energy permeated the air. No one had slept well. We met at Michael's house, the designated launch point, his sedan being the most reliable for a potentially long drive. The mood was grim, but beneath it, a nervous determination had taken root. We packed a backpack with essentials, 2 powerful LED flashlights, a small first aid kit, fully charged power banks, and a bottle of water for each of us. David, ever the tech enthusiast, had downloaded offline maps of the area around Willow Creek, knowing that cell service could be spotty in isolated regions. "Okay, Jessica said, cinching her backpack straps. Everyone has their phone fully charged? Let someone know our general destination just in case? Without going into the whole future photos thing, obviously. Michael nodded, looking pale but resolute. I texted my brother, told him we were doing an impromptu hike upstate, near the old Willow Creek State Park. Said we'd be back by late evening. A white lie, but a necessary one. Explaining the truth was beyond impossible. Emily clutched a small worn teddy bear, a comfort item from her childhood. She looked absolutely terrified, but her jaw was set. I'm ready, she whispered, though her voice trembled. As we piled into Michael's sedan, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken fears. The camera, wrapped carefully in a cloth, was tucked into David's backpack. He insisted on bringing it, almost reverently, as if it were a compass guiding us to our strange destination. The drive was long, stretching for hours as we left the familiar suburban sprawl behind, trading it for rolling hills and eventually dense, encroaching forest. The landscape grew wilder, the town sparser, the roads narrower and less maintained. Each mile brought us closer to the unknown, to the place that existed as a photograph before it existed as a present reality. The sky, which had started clear, began to cloud over, mirroring the growing anxiety in the car. A low gray blanket spread across the heavens, casting everything in a somber, muted light. It felt ominous, as if the weather itself was conspiring to set the stage for whatever awaited us. We're getting close, David announced, peering at his phone's GPS, his voice tight. According to the map, the road for Willow Creek Orphanage should be coming up on our left, just past that cluster of dead trees. A shiver ran down my spine. The dead trees. I remembered them from one of the photos, skeletal fingers reaching towards a bruised sky. Michael slowed the car, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. We scanned the left side of the road, our eyes searching. And there it was, barely visible through a tangle of overgrown brambles and rusted wire fence, an old faded sign, half obscured by ivy. The same sign. Willow Creek Orphanage, Emily breathed, her voice barely audible. The gravel path leading off the main road was barely distinguishable, choked with weeds and fallen leaves. It looked like it hadn't been used in decades. Michael turned the wheel, the tires crunching loudly as we left the relative safety of the paved road. The dense canopy of trees immediately swallowed us, plunging the path into a premature twilight. The air grew colder, heavier. The path was narrow, barely wide enough for the car, and severely rutted. Thick branches scraped against the car's sides, the sound a grating symphony of unease. We drove slowly, cautiously, each of us straining to see through the gloom, our senses on high alert. Then through a break in the trees, a silhouette emerged. A sprawling, decaying structure, its roof partially collapsed, windows like vacant eyes staring out from a face of crumbling brick. The ivy, thick and relentless, climbed over every surface, claiming the building back into the earth. It was exactly as it had appeared in the photos. Every detail chillingly precise. We had arrived. The future was now the present. Michael killed the engine, and the sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the distant caw of a crow and the rustle of leaves in the wind. The air here was heavy with the smell of damp earth and decay. A profound sense of desolation hung over the place, a lingering echo of forgotten lives and untold sorrows. It's even worse in person, Jessica whispered, her voice tight with apprehension. I looked around, trying to match the remaining photos to our surroundings. The desolate grounds, the broken swing set half buried in weeds, the single gnarled oak tree. And then my gaze fell upon a patch of thick, thorny bushes near what looked like the main entrance. My blood ran cold. Half hidden within the shadows cast by the dense foliage, barely discernible against the deepening gloom, was a flash of something. A glint of metal, perhaps. Or was it a pair of eyes watching us? My heart hammered against my ribs. It was too dark, too obscured. But for a chilling moment, I was certain I saw movement. A figure. The figure from the photo. Right there. Waiting. The words hung in the suffocating stillness of the woods. A silent scream trapped in my throat. My blood ran cold, fear of physical weight pressing down on me. Jessica beside me was a statue, her breath hitched, her eyes wide with a terror that mirrored my own. We were both paralyzed, caught in the beam of our own flashlights, illuminated targets for whatever lurked in the deeper shadows. The figure didn't move. Not exactly. It was more like a shift, a subtle ripple in the darkness, as if the very air around it distorted. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone, vanished, swallowed by the oppressive blackness of the trees, leaving behind only the echoing thud of my own frantic heartbeat, and the phantom image burned into my retina. Did you see that?" Jessica whispered, her voice barely a thread, a fragile thing that could snap at any moment. I could only nod, my throat too tight for words. My flashlight beam danced erratically, sweeping through the spot where the figure had been, finding nothing but gnarled tree trunks and dense undergrowth. The air, already heavy with damp earth and pine, now felt charged with an unseen menace. Every rustle of leaves, every distant hoot of an owl, became a potential threat. "We need to go. Now," I finally managed, pulling Jessica by the arm. The urgency in my voice was primal, overriding any lingering curiosity or journalistic instinct. This wasn't a story anymore. It was survival. We stumbled backward, not running wildly, but moving with a desperate, hurried caution, our flashlights cutting frantic arcs through the gloom. Our eyes darted into every shadow, every cluster of trees, half expecting the figure to reappear, closer this time, blocking our escape. The short distance to the car felt like miles, each step a victory against the encroaching dread. Once inside the relative safety of the vehicle, doors locked, engine sputtering to life, we both sagged against the seats, adrenaline coursing through us, leaving us trembling and breathless. The cabin, a dark silhouette against the barely visible horizon, seemed to mock us, its secret still intact, its guardian still lurking. "It was him, Michael. The man from the photo. The one with the obscured face," Jessica said, her voice steadier now, but still laced with disbelief. "It was real." "I know," I replied, running a hand through my hair. "But why didn't it do anything? Why just stand there and then disappear?" Jessica shook her head, her gaze fixed on the rearview mirror, as if expecting to see the figure materialize in our wake. Maybe it was a warning, a message, or maybe it wanted us to see something, or to think we saw something. Her words sent a fresh wave of chills down my spine. The idea that we were being played with, observed, was almost more terrifying than a direct confrontation. We drove back to the motel in silence, the weight of the encounter pressing down on us. Sleep was impossible. Our minds raced, replaying the scene, trying to make sense of the impossible. The next morning, exhaustion etched on our faces, we sat in our motel room, a map spread across the table, coffee growing cold in our hands. The fear hadn't dissipated, but it had sharpened into a grim determination. "We can't just leave," Jessica stated, breaking the silence. "Not after that. It means we're close. Too close to turn back." I nodded slowly. "But what are we close to? And why is someone actively guarding it? What is so important about that cabin, those woods, that someone would stand watch over it for decades?" We reviewed everything we knew. The families, the photos, the rapid disappearance, the vague reports, the dead ends. The figure in the woods was the first tangible evidence of an active, current threat. What if the cabin isn't just a place where these families were, I mused, tapping my finger on the map, but a place where they went, or were taken? And what if the disposable cameras weren't just for memories, but for documentation? Jessica's eyes widened. Documentation of what? A new life? An initiation? A cult? The word hung in the air, heavy and disturbing. Fit. The isolation, the secrecy, the sudden departure of multiple families, the figure guarding the location. It all began to coalesce into a chilling possibility. If it's a cult, they'd have records. Something more than just those few photos, I theorized. And if that cabin is the center of it, or was, then there has to be something inside. Despite the terror of the previous night, a new, more dangerous resolve settled over us. We had to go back. Not just to the woods, but into the cabin itself. The figure had appeared to warn us off, but perhaps that warning was also an invitation to look deeper. This time we planned meticulously. We waited until late morning, hoping daylight would offer some advantage, though we knew the woods could still hide many secrets. We packed a small bag with water, snacks, a first aid kit, and an old heavy wrench, a last resort, but a comforting weight in my hand. The approach to the cabin was tense. Every snap of a twig, every rustle made us jump. The cabin itself, in the pale morning light, looked even more dilapidated, more forgotten. Its windows were dark, like vacant eyes staring out from a skull. The front door was still sealed tight, seemingly untouched for years. "There has to be another way in," Jessica whispered, circling the structure cautiously. We found it at the back, almost completely obscured by overgrown vines and a leaning shed. A small grimy window high up, its glass cracked. It took some effort, but using the wrench to pry at the old rotted frame, we managed to force it open just enough for me to squeeze through. Followed by Jessica. The air inside was stale, thick with dust and the scent of decay. The cabin was larger than it appeared from the outside. A single main room with a crude fireplace and a few smaller adjoining rooms. Cobwebs draped every surface like ghostly curtains. Old broken furniture lay scattered, covered in a thick layer of grime. "Look at this place," Jessica breathed, her voice echoing in the oppressive silence. "It feels lived in but frozen in time." We began our search, moving slowly, methodically. There were no grand revelations immediately, just remnants of a life abruptly abandoned. A child's worn shoe, a broken mug, yellowed newspapers from decades past. It was like sifting through the archaeological remains of a lost civilization. Then, in one of the smaller rooms, hidden beneath a loose floorboard near the hearth, I felt something. My fingers brushed against a rough, leather-bound object. With a grunt, I managed to pry the board up further, revealing a compartment. Inside, nestled among dry leaves and dust, was an old journal. It was thick, its leather cover cracked and faded, its pages brittle with age. I carefully opened it. The handwriting was cramped, precise, but increasingly erratic as the entries progressed. The first entries were dated almost 50 years ago. "Michael, what is it?" Jessica asked, leaning over my shoulder, her breath warm on my neck. "A journal," I replied, my voice hushed, a sense of profound discovery washing over me. Someone lived here. Someone kept a record. We began to read, our eyes scanning the faded ink, piecing together a story far more disturbing than we could have ever imagined. The journal belonged to a man named Thomas Miller. His early entries spoke of a utopian vision, a desire to escape the corrupting influence of modern society, to build a self-sufficient community in the wilderness. He wrote of like-minded families drawn by a shared philosophy, seeking a simpler, purer existence. But as the entries progressed, the tone shifted. The idealism curdled into something darker, more insidious. Thomas wrote of the architect, a charismatic leader who had slowly transformed their shared vision into an absolute doctrine. He spoke of the teachings, which demanded complete submission, isolation, and a severance from their past lives. Then the chilling part. Thomas described the arrival of new families, eager to join their secluded community. He detailed their reception, their re-education, and their integration. He even mentioned the documentation process. "The cameras," Jessica whispered, pointing to an entry. "He writes about the cameras, disposable ones, for untraceable records of transformation." My blood ran cold. The photos, they weren't just snapshots. They were records of people being absorbed into this hidden society. The smiles in the photos, once seemingly innocent, now felt like forced performances, a facade over something terrifying. Thomas's later entries grew desperate. He expressed profound regret, hinting at dark practices, at members who tried to leave and were reabsorbed or removed. He wrote of the harvest, a cryptic term that filled us with dread, and of the watchers, individuals tasked with ensuring no one left and no outsiders intruded. The figure we saw in the woods, a watcher. His final entries were fragmented, almost frantic. He spoke of a great unveiling, a final gathering that was approaching, a culmination of the architect's grand design. And then a single terrifying sentence scrawled in a shaky hand. "They are building the archive. All of it. The truth is hidden in the vault. The real truth. Not just the pictures. They are building it. Beneath the old well, near the easternmost property line. It is where everything is kept. Everything." The journal ended there. No more entries. Just the chilling silence of a story abruptly cut short. We stared at each other, the full weight of Thomas Miller's confession settling upon us. This wasn't just about missing families. It was about an entire hidden community, a cult, and an archive that held the darkest secrets of their existence. The disposable camera photos were just the bait, a breadcrumb trail leading to a much larger, more terrifying truth. And that truth, according to Thomas, was buried under an old well. We had found our next terrifying destination. The drive to the well was long, silent, and heavy with a dread that clung to the air like the humidity before a summer storm. Thomas's words had painted a chilling picture, not just of a location, but of an endpoint, a burial ground for secrets too vast and monstrous to comprehend. David gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, his eyes scanning the endless stretch of road, while I hunched in the passenger seat, the map on my phone a glowing portal to our impending nightmare. Emily had insisted on coming, her resolve hardening after our conversation with Thomas, her fear now a sharp, focused determination. She sat in the back, a shovel and a crowbar clanking softly against each other beside her feet, making the silence even more profound. We drove for what felt like an eternity, leaving the last vestiges of civilization behind, following an unpaved road that dissolved into a barely discernible trail. The moon, a sliver of silver against a bruised sky, offered little light, forcing us to rely on the Jeep's high beams, which cut through the oppressive darkness like desperate beacons. Trees, gnarled and ancient, clawed at the sky, their shadows dancing menacingly in our periphery. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sent a jolt of icy fear through me. We were venturing into a place forgotten by time, a place where secrets festered. Finally, David slowed the Jeep, the engine sputtering to a halt amidst a thicket of overgrown brush. "This is it," he murmured, his voice barely a whisper. Ahead, barely visible through the tangled branches, a crumbling stone structure loomed. It was an old well, exactly as Thomas had described. Moss-covered stones, some dislodged and scattered, formed a low wall around a gaping black maw. An ancient, rusted iron grate, half collapsed, lay across the opening, a skeletal hand reaching out from the abyss. The air here was heavy, stagnant, carrying the faint, earthy scent of decay and something else, something metallic and cold. We stepped out of the Jeep, the crunch of our boots on dried leaves unnaturally loud in the profound silence. Emily, her face pale but resolute, retrieved the tools. The crowbar felt heavy and cold in my hand, a poor defense against the unknown. We approached the well cautiously, our flashlights cutting through the gloom. The well itself was deeper than I expected, a dark, bottomless pit that seemed to swallow the light. The rusted grate was too weak to support any weight, but it also wasn't the main obstacle. Thomas had said under an old well, implying something beneath it, not in it. We circled the structure, our beams dancing across the ground. The earth immediately surrounding the well was disturbed, not recently, but long ago. There were faint outlines of what looked like an old, collapsed shed or outbuilding, and then David spotted it. Partially obscured by a tangle of thorny vines and a fallen tree branch, a section of the stone wall around the well was different. The stones here were not as old, not as moss-covered. They looked like they had been replaced or rather added. And beneath them, almost perfectly camouflaged by dirt and leaves, was a faint seam in the earth, a rectangular outline. "A hidden entrance," Emily breathed, her voice tight with a mixture of fear and grim satisfaction. He wasn't talking about going down the well. We began to dig. The ground was hard, compacted clay, but the hidden seam had been disturbed before. We used the shovel and crowbar, grunting with effort, tearing through roots and packed earth. As we cleared away the debris, the outline became clearer. A heavy wooden trapdoor, reinforced with corroded iron bands. It was flush with the ground, almost invisible to the casual observer. The wood itself was ancient, warped, and stained with something dark and unidentifiable. A wave of nausea washed over me. This wasn't just a secret, it was a tomb. With a collective push and the leverage of the crowbar, we managed to pry open the heavy trapdoor. It groaned on rusted hinges, revealing not a well shaft, but a narrow, dark descent. A ladder made of rough-hewn wood disappeared into the blackness below. The air that wafted up was even colder, heavier, and carried that same metallic tang, now stronger, more distinct. It smelled like old iron, damp earth, and something else, something that made my stomach clench. "Who goes first?" David asked, his voice strained. I looked at him, then at Emily. "I will," I said, surprising myself with the calm conviction in my voice. Fear was a cold knot in my gut, but a stronger force, an insatiable need for answers propelled me forward. I had to know. We all had to know. Clutching my flashlight, I carefully descended the rickety ladder. The rungs groaned under my weight, each creak echoing ominously in the confined space. The descent was longer than I anticipated, probably 20 feet or so, before my feet touched a solid, damp floor. I shone my light around. It was a small, circular chamber, clearly man-made, with rough-hewn stone walls. In the center, a narrow carved archway led into another larger space. "It's clear," I called up, my voice sounding hollow and distant. David followed, then Emily, the trapdoor groaning shut above us with a final, sickening thud that sealed us in. We moved through the archway, our flashlight sweeping across a scene that instantly froze the blood in my veins. This wasn't a tomb in the traditional sense, but it was a mausoleum of forgotten lives. We stood in a large underground chamber, much bigger than the initial entry point. The air here was dry surprisingly and still. Along the walls were rows and rows of metal filing cabinets, stretching into the gloom. But it wasn't the cabinets that seized my attention. In the center of the room, under a single bare bulb hanging from the low ceiling, was a large, heavy wooden table. And on that table, meticulously arranged, were hundreds, perhaps thousands, of disposable cameras. They weren't just the few we had found. They were an entire collection neatly stacked, each one labeled with a small faded tag. My gaze drifted to the walls around the table. They were covered floor to ceiling with photographs. Not the blurry, chaotic shots we'd seen, but studio-quality portraits. Faces stared back at us, men, women, children, families. Happy families. Smiling, laughing, posing for what looked like professional family portraits. Each photo had a small handwritten note beneath it. A name, a date, and then a single chilling word. Processed. "What is this place?" Emily whispered, her voice trembling. David picked up one of the disposable cameras. "These aren't just props," he said, his voice hoarse. "They're records. Each one is a record." We started to look closer at the photos. The faces were unfamiliar, yet they exuded a disturbing sense of normalcy. Perfect families, perfect smiles. But the notes, processed. It was a clinical, dehumanizing term. It implied a system in operation. Then my flashlight beam landed on a specific section of the wall. My breath caught in my throat. Among the sea of smiling strangers, I saw a face I recognized. A young woman holding a toddler. It was the woman from the photo album we'd found in the abandoned house. The one Thomas had pointed to, the one he said was his sister. Beneath her photo, the same chilling label, processed. Next to her, another family. A man, a woman, 2 teenagers. The Millers. The family from the first disposable camera we'd ever found. And beneath their smiling faces, the same word, processed. A cold, hard truth began to crystallize in my mind. A truth far more horrifying than anything I had imagined. The disposable cameras weren't just a record of people before they disappeared. They were a record of people after they had been changed, disposed of their old lives. Processed meant their identities had been erased, meticulously wiped clean, and new ones fabricated. The photos were a before picture, a souvenir of who they were before they became someone else entirely. The disposable cameras we found, the ones with the chaotic, blurry shots, were the evidence of their old lives being discarded, a final reckless act of defiance, or perhaps a desperate plea for help, taken by people who knew their true selves were about to vanish. The organization wasn't just making people disappear. They were remaking them. For what purpose? Blackmail? Witness protection gone rogue? Or something far more sinister? A network of hidden identities for clandestine operations? We opened one of the metal filing cabinets. Inside, meticulously organized, were files. Thick folders, each labeled with a name and a date. I pulled one out. It was a complete dossier. Birth certificates, social security numbers, school records, employment history, family trees, even old medical records. Everything about a person's life, from birth to the date of their processing. And then attached to the back of each file was another, much thinner file. A new identity. New name, new birth date, new history. A ghost of a person fabricated from thin air. This wasn't just a few isolated cases. This was a vast systematic operation. An entire underground industry dedicated to erasing and rebuilding lives. And the well was just the entrance to their central archive, their factory of forgotten souls. My mind reeled. Thomas. He hadn't just been a witness. He had been a victim of this system, or perhaps an unwilling participant forced to process his own family. He'd gone through the system, somehow resisted, and escaped, taking with him the knowledge of this place. His sister's photo, labeled processed, was a testament to his own personal horror. He hadn't given us a location. He'd given us his location, the source of his trauma. Suddenly, a faint hum filled the air. It was a low, mechanical thrumming, growing steadily louder. The single bare bulb above the table flickered, then dimmed. David grabbed my arm, his eyes wide with alarm. "Did you hear that?" The hum intensified, vibrating through the stone floor. It wasn't coming from inside the chamber. It was coming from above. Then the trapdoor above us, the one we had thought we'd sealed, began to creak. Slowly, agonizingly, it lifted, letting in a sliver of moonlight, but also the silhouette of a figure standing above. We froze, our flashlights instantly extinguished, plunging us into near total darkness, illuminated only by the flickering bulb and the faint moonlight filtering down. A voice, low and calm, echoed down the shaft. "Well, well, well. Look what the cat dragged in. You've been quite busy, haven't you? Thomas was always a sentimental fool. Telling you about this place, a fatal mistake. For him and now for you." The voice was cold, devoid of emotion. It was a voice that knew us, a voice that had been watching. We were trapped, deep underground, surrounded by the ghosts of identities, and the organization had found us. The breadcrumb trail had led us right into their lair, and now we were the ones who were about to be processed. Our own lives, our own identities were about to become disposable. The cold metal of the restraints bit into our wrists, a stark contrast to the humid, forgotten air of the archives. We were no longer hunters. We were the hunted, netted in our own trap. Two figures, indistinguishable in dark uniforms, moved with chilling efficiency, securing us, gagging us, and then hoisting us onto what felt like stretchers. The world tilted, then blurred, as we were moved through the labyrinthine corridors we had just navigated. The whispers of the past, the echoes of erased lives, seemed to mock us now. We had sought answers, and in doing so, we had become the next question to be answered by this insidious organization. The journey was disorienting, a series of bumps and turns, the muffled sounds of our captors the only indication of movement. Felt like hours, though it could have been minutes. Eventually, we were deposited into separate sterile chambers. The gags were removed, but the restraints remained, pinning us to what felt like examination tables. The air was cool, smelling faintly of antiseptic and something metallic like ozone. The walls were a featureless, pale gray, devoid of any distinguishing marks. No windows, no doors save for the one we'd been brought through, which now sealed with an almost imperceptible hiss. A screen flickered to life on the wall opposite me, displaying a series of abstract patterns that shifted and pulsed, almost hypnotically. I tried to resist, to avert my gaze, but my eyes were drawn to it, my mind struggling to process the visual assault. From somewhere unseen, a voice, calm and deep, permeated the room. It was devoid of emotion like a machine, yet carried an unsettling authority. "Welcome, Michael. And Jessica, in your adjacent chamber. You have proven resourceful. Your persistence, while admirable in its zeal, was ultimately futile. You have reached the end of your journey, and now the beginning of ours for you." My heart pounded, a frantic drum against my ribs. Jessica, was she okay? Could she hear this too? The voice continued, explaining, dissecting, dismantling our reality with each perfectly articulated word. "You sought the truth behind the disposable cameras. You found a facility, a network, and a purpose that, to your limited understanding, must seem monstrous. But you misunderstand. We are not destroyers, we are refiners. We are architects of potential." A different image appeared on the screen, a complex flowchart, intricate lines connecting various nodes labeled identity, memory, trajectory, outcome. It was like a diagram of a human life broken down into data points. Every choice, every missed opportunity, every path not taken creates ripples. Imagine a world where those ripples could be controlled, optimized, where the potential for human achievement, for societal harmony, could be maximized by gently nudging individuals towards their most beneficial outcomes. That is our mission. The voice paused, and I could almost feel the weight of its unseen gaze. The disposable cameras are merely a tool, Michael, a data acquisition device. They capture moments of pure, unadulterated potential, a fleeting glance, an unsaid word, a path momentarily considered. These aren't just snapshots of what wasn't taken. They are glimpses of what could be, or perhaps what shouldn't be. Each camera, each film roll is a blueprint, a record of a decision point, a fork in the road where an individual chose one way, but the camera, in its unique way, captured the shadow of the other. We analyze these shadows. We identify the moments where a different choice, a subtle redirection, could lead to a more optimal life. Not just for the individual, but for the collective. A life free from the burdens of regret, from the weight of poor judgment, from the chaos of unchecked variables. I wanted to scream, to lash out, to tell this detached voice that they were playing God, that they were stealing free will. But my throat was dry, my mind reeling. "Your friend David Miller," the voice continued, and a picture of David, young and smiling, appeared briefly on the screen, then vanished. A brilliant mind, a promising researcher. But his path was fraught with self-doubt, with anxieties that bordered on crippling. He was on the verge of a breakthrough, but also on the precipice of a complete breakdown. We intervened. A gentle recalibration of his memories, a subtle alteration of his perceived past, allowed him to shed those inhibitions. He is now thriving, fulfilling his true potential, contributing significantly. He believes his success is entirely his own, a testament to his hard work. And in a way it is. We merely removed the obstacles he himself had constructed. My blood ran cold. They hadn't just erased memories, they had rewritten them. They had created a false reality, a manufactured sense of self. David wasn't David anymore. He was a carefully curated version of him. And Amelia Hayes, the voice went on, her image appearing then fading. A truly empathetic soul, but prone to destructive relationships, constantly sacrificing her own well-being for others who did not deserve it. Her trajectory was one of perpetual heartbreak and self-erasure. We provided a series of nudges, a revised perspective on past interactions, subtle shifts in her emotional responses. She is now in a stable, healthy relationship, pursuing her artistic passions with renewed vigor. She believes she simply learned from her mistakes, grew stronger, and she did, with a little help. The sheer audacity, the chilling self-assurance in the voice was sickening. They saw themselves as benevolent overseers, guiding humanity to a better future, but they were doing it by stripping away the very essence of what made us human. Our struggles, our mistakes, our authentic journey. You, Michael and Jessica, the voice resumed, its focus returning to us. You are more complex cases. Your journey into our operations has exposed you to information that cannot be allowed to persist in its current form within your cognitive frameworks. You have seen the raw mechanics, the gears turning behind the curtain, and that, unfortunately, makes you a liability in your present state. A wave of dread washed over me, a primal fear that transcended mere physical danger. This wasn't about pain or death. It was about something far more insidious. But we do not waste potential, the voice assured us, almost kindly. You both possess remarkable intellect and tenacity. Michael, your analytical mind, your ability to connect disparate pieces of information, is truly exceptional. Jessica, your intuitive grasp of human behavior, your empathy, and your unwavering resolve are equally impressive. It would be a disservice to allow such attributes to be consumed by the chaos of a life burdened by inconvenient truths. The screen now displayed a shimmering, almost ethereal depiction of a human brain, with various regions lighting up, data streams flowing through them. It looked like a map of consciousness. We will simply optimize your narratives. We will retain your core strengths, your inherent talents, but we will remove the elements that currently cause friction. The memories of this facility, of our methods, of the disposable camera's true purpose, these will be gently, meticulously excised. In their place, we will implant a revised storyline, one that allows you to continue your lives, perhaps even more effectively, without the burden of this knowledge. You will remember a different path, a different conclusion to your investigation, perhaps a dead end, a false lead, a realization that the whole thing was an elaborate hoax. You will return to your lives, to your families, to your friends, as if nothing truly significant happened, save for a fascinating, ultimately unresolved mystery. You will be free, Michael and Jessica, in a way you were never truly free before. Free from the weight of a truth too heavy for most to bear. My mind raced, desperately trying to find a flaw, a way out. They weren't just erasing memories, they were creating them, fabricating entire chapters of our lives, dictating our perceptions, our beliefs. They were stealing our autonomy, our very selves. The process is entirely painless, the voice continued, oblivious to my internal terror. It is more akin to a deep restorative sleep. You will awaken refreshed, with a clear mind, ready to embrace the life that has been refined for you. Consider it an upgrade, a liberation from the constraints of unwanted knowledge. A soft, almost imperceptible hum filled the chamber, growing steadily louder. The patterns on the screen intensified, swirling, pulling me deeper into their hypnotic dance. A faint sweet scent like blooming jasmine began to fill the air, insidious and calming. My eyelids grew heavy, my thoughts beginning to fray at the edges. I fought it, I truly did, trying to focus on Jessica, on our mission, on the faces of our families, anything to anchor myself to reality. But the hum was pervasive, the scent intoxicating, and the shifting patterns on the screen were becoming irresistible. This was it. This was the processing. Our lives, our identities were about to become disposable, rewritten, edited, and then returned to the world as carefully crafted fictions. The disposable camera photos we didn't take, the lives we didn't live, were about to become our new reality, meticulously constructed by an organization that believed it knew better than we did. The last thing I saw before the darkness fully enveloped me was the image on the screen, a single flickering question mark, dissolving into a sea of perfect, calculated order. I awoke to a quiet hum, a vibration more felt than heard, permeating the very air around me. My eyes fluttered open, adjusting to a softened, diffused light that seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. I was no longer in the sterile, metallic confines of the facility. Instead, I lay on a surface that felt like cool, polished stone, in a vast circular chamber. The walls were not walls at all, but a shimmering, translucent membrane, revealing an impossible vista beyond. A swirling galaxy of data, constellations of interconnected thoughts, and distant, flickering moments that felt like echoes of forgotten dreams. A figure emerged from the diffused light, moving with an unnerving grace. She was a woman, perhaps in her late 50s, with intelligent, calm eyes that seemed to hold an infinite depth of understanding. Her silver hair was pulled back neatly, and she wore simple, elegant attire that seemed to blend with the ethereal environment. There was no aggression in her posture, no threat in her gaze, only a quiet, profound serenity that was almost more disconcerting than any animosity. "Welcome back," she said, her voice soft, yet resonating with an authority that transcended mere volume. "Or perhaps welcome forward. My name is Dr. Eleanor Vance, and you, it seems, have seen more than most are ever meant to." I tried to speak, but my throat felt dry, my voice a mere rasp. She offered a small, knowing smile. "There's no need to strain yourself. Much of what you experienced, what you believed you understood, was merely the surface of a far greater design. The architects, as you called us, prefer the term custodians. We are not builders of worlds, but rather tenders of the continuum." She gestured to the swirling tapestry beyond the translucent membrane. "What you see out there is not merely theoretical data. It is the living, breathing tapestry of all potential realities, all possible choices, all divergent paths woven by the fabric of existence. And within that infinite possibility, there is chaos. Unchecked, that chaos inevitably leads to collapse, to suffering beyond measure, to the end of everything." My mind raced, struggling to process her words. "The photos, the cameras," I finally managed to croak out. "Ah, the disposable cameras," she nodded, her eyes twinkling with a hint of something akin to pity. "They were, in essence, echoes, residual data from timelines that were pruned, realities that diverged too far from the optimal path, threatening to unravel the entire system. Think of them as phantom limbs of the continuum, momentary glitches in our sophisticated corrective algorithms. Your unique neural sensitivity, a rare genetic marker we've observed in a very small percentage of the population, allowed you to perceive these residual echoes, these photos we didn't take up." She walked closer, her presence radiating a quiet power. "We do not manipulate for control, not in the way you might imagine. We guide, we nudge, we make subtle adjustments to prevent catastrophic outcomes. A car accident averted, a chance encounter facilitated, a critical decision influenced ever so slightly, all to guide humanity towards a more stable, more prosperous, more ordered future. The world you inhabit now, the lives you live, are the result of countless such corrections. A universe where Michael survived that accident, where Sarah pursued her passion, where your own path led you here to this understanding. These were not random occurrences. They were carefully orchestrated adjustments." The air felt heavy with the weight of her revelation. My entire life, my reality, my choices, were they truly mine? Or just the outcome of a cosmic algorithm? The initial anomalies that drew you in, the seemingly random appearance of the cameras, the whispers of alternate lives, they were not entirely accidental, Dr. Vance continued, her voice softening further. They were a test, in a way, a beacon, for those rare individuals like yourself who possess the capacity to perceive the deeper currents of reality. We needed to know if the system was stable, if the corrections were holding, and if anyone could still see the ghosts of discarded timelines. Your journey, your investigation, confirmed both the system's robustness and the existence of your unique perception. I thought of Michael and Sarah, of everything we had risked. My friends, what about them? They are safe, she assured me, a calm finality in her tone. They have been gently reintegrated into the primary continuum, their memories subtly adjusted to align with the optimal timeline. They are living the lives they were always meant to live, free from the burden of these discarded realities. They are happy, healthy, and entirely unaware of the depths you've plumbed. Their perception is exactly as it should be. A cold dread settled in my stomach. They were happy, yes, but at what cost? Their free will, their true experiences erased. And me? I asked the question, barely a whisper. What happens to me now that I know? Dr. Vance regarded me with those deep, knowing eyes. That, my dear, is the ultimate question. The flickering question mark you saw before you lost consciousness was indeed a query. Can you accept this truth? Can you live within a reality you now know is carefully curated? Or will your unique perception become a source of endless torment, a constant reminder of the paths not taken, the lives not lived, the choices that were never truly yours? She paused, allowing the gravity of her words to sink in. Some, when faced with this knowledge, find it liberating. They embrace the peace of the ordered world, understanding that their individual struggles contribute to a greater, harmonious design. Others find it unbearable, a cage of gilded unreality. For those, we offer a choice. Integration into the custodians, to help us maintain the delicate balance, to become a part of the greater purpose. Or reintegration into the continuum, like your friends, with your unique perception suppressed, your memories of this encounter gently faded, allowing you to live a life of blissful ignorance. The choice hung in the air, heavier than any physical burden. To join them, to become a cog in the machine that shaped destiny, to knowingly participate in the subtle erasure of individual autonomy for the sake of a perceived greater good. Or to return to a world I now knew was a carefully constructed illusion, my mind forever haunted by the echoes of what could have been, unable to unsee the threads of control woven into the fabric of everyday life. To live a lie, or to become a part of the lie's perpetuation. The perfect, calculated order. I murmured, recalling the phrase. Precisely, Dr. Vance confirmed. It is the only way humanity survives, the only way it thrives. Free will, in its purest, unadulterated form, is a beautiful concept, but a dangerous one. It leads to extinction. We merely provide the guardrails, the gentle hand on the tiller, ensuring the ship of humanity navigates the treacherous seas of existence without capsizing. I looked out at the swirling galaxy of data, the infinite possibilities, now knowing that most of them were merely discards, never meant to be chosen. The faces of Michael and Sarah flashed in my mind, their smiles, their laughter. Were those moments truly theirs, or just the best possible outcome dictated by an algorithm? My own life, my decisions, my loves, my losses, were they authentic, or merely carefully arranged dominoes falling in a predetermined sequence? A profound weariness settled over me, a bone-deep exhaustion that went beyond physical fatigue. The world I had known, the very foundation of my identity, had crumbled, replaced by this vast, elegant, and terrifying truth. There was no grand conspiracy of evil, no malevolent force pulling the strings, only a system designed for survival, for optimal order. And in that, there was a chilling kind of horror, far more absolute than any villain could ever embody. Dr. Vance extended a hand, her expression unreadable. The choice is yours. Embrace the truth and contribute to the continuum, or let us return you to the peace of unknowing. Either way, the order remains. I stared at her hand, then at the swirling cosmos beyond the membrane, then back at my own hands, which suddenly felt foreign, alien. The question mark, the one I had seen flickering on the screen, was no longer external. It was etched into the very core of my being, a permanent scar on my perception. I knew what I had to do, or perhaps what I was always meant to do. The next thing I remember is the scent of fresh rain on asphalt, the distant sound of city traffic, and the familiar, comforting weight of my own bed. The sun streamed through my window just as it always did. My phone buzzed with an unread message from Michael, asking if I wanted to grab coffee later. Sarah had posted a picture of her latest art project, vibrant and full of life. Everything was exactly as it should be, perfectly ordered, perfectly normal. I got up, walked to the bathroom, and splashed cold water on my face. Looking in the mirror, I saw my reflection unchanged. But behind my eyes, I knew something was fundamentally different. The world looked the same, but I saw the faint, shimmering lines of its construction, the subtle nudges, the gentle corrections. I saw the ghost of the question mark, not on a screen, but in the quiet spaces between moments, in the unspoken choices, in the carefully curated perfection of it all. The disposable camera photos we didn't take were gone, but the knowledge of their existence, and the invisible hand that erased them, was now indelibly imprinted on my soul. And I knew with a chilling certainty that I would never truly be able to unsee the order that governed everything.